Top of the afternoon to where am I? Am I there? Am I here? I don't see myself. Okay. All right. Am I on? Am I good? Okay, I'm live. I don't see my picture. Okay, so I'll just have to fake it. I don't see my picture. I don't know what I'm looking like. I've done something to the screen. Let me see if I can correct this. Um, I don't know if I can. Okay, so I'm here now. Hey, top of the evening, everybody, and welcome to the Dialogue with Dozell, Monday night, 8 p.m. Tell everybody, we've been doing this thing now for, wow, this is the fourth year. That's unbelievable. Dialogue with Dozell is on the air. So glad you're with us tonight. Flying solo, no guests, it's you and I. We're doing this thing together tonight. We're talking about the formation of Black history. But before we can do anything like this tonight, we want to dedicate tonight's show. Tonight's show is dedicated to the love and memory of Mr. Joe Madison. Joe Madison, who is known as, to viewers all over the world, as the Black Eagle. We have done many shows on broadcasting and broadcasters, particularly during African American History Month. This month, we dedicated to one of the best to ever do it. Joe Madison, who started out as a civil rights advocate in the city of Detroit, in the D. WOL radio. He was at a basically white radio. It started crossing over, and as it crossed over, the appeal came. Joe became more involved in civil rights activities. He was a charter member of the, or not a charter, but he was a member of the NAACP, a big time leader in that organization, a grassroots leader. He combined with the growing political influence of Black African Americans in Detroit, and fought and advocated for the rights of people of color, particularly African Americans. Joe Madison would later move to Washington, D.C. He is a graduate of Washington University, and he has also was awarded an honorary doctorate degree. Joe Madison became known to us as the Black Eagle, because his message flew all over the land. And his morning drive on Sirius XM was one of the mainstays of that platform. And it was only in December that he advised his viewers, or his listeners, that he would be taking a short leave of absence as the prostate cancer had come back, and he was taking time off to fight it. Well, as it turns out, Joe never did return to the airways, but he's forever in our head, forever in our hearts, forever in our ears. The work that he did, the work that he led, he was often overheard when you voice a complaint, when you call into the show. He would say, okay, that's what it is. Now, what are you going to do about it? He's also quite humorous. On the platform of SiriusXM, he's able to use peppered language, and he would always be fined by his staff when the language became a little too peppered. But Joe Madison, man, we owe so much to you, people like me who are trying to work through this kind of medium. We'll always honor you and thank you for your fight for not only the rights of Black and brown African-American people, for human rights for people across the globe. To the family of Joe Madison, our prayers. We love you. The Black Eagle, Joe Madison. Tonight's dialogue is dedicated to it. So here we are. Tonight, we're having, this is the kickoff. This is the first show. This is the first show of African American history. Always something funny, man. There's a little echo in the background. My little radio trying to be funny. Tonight marks the first Monday night of African American History Month, or Black History Month, and originally was going to do a show that dealt with one of the specifics, one of the very intricate pieces of our history and our culture. And we're going to do that next week. We're going to kind of do a show on the anthology of Black music. And I have two special guests. Well, we're going to have some other guests, but there's some very special guests that are going to be here with us for that show. But tonight, we're just going to look at the formations of African American History Month, or Black History Month, and talk about how it got here and where it is now, and its relevance. It'll always be relevant, but I want to hear you talk about its relevance. and talk about its future and those kinds of things. So tonight, that's what we're going to do. Before we get into tonight's topic, I want to say that Joe Madison was a victim well, Joe Madison suffered from prostate cancer. He succumbed to prostate cancer. And I want to use this forum to speak to all men, particularly my African American, all people of color. One out of every 8 persons, 1 out of every 8 men in America are victims of prostate cancer. 1 out of every 8 men. And when it comes to African Americans, the numbers dwindle. It's 1 out of every 6 of us. 1 out of every 6. Prostate cancer used to be a death sentence. It was a diagnosis when you heard it, you dreaded it and you feared it, and it was just brought dread to families. But prostate cancer, as an overcomer of prostate cancer, I'm telling you that early diagnosis is the key to overcoming prostate cancer. Early diagnosis. Who likes the exams? Who volunteers for that? Well, I do. When it means that a doctor can test to see if my prostate is swollen, as a very first way of seeing if possibly you're a victim of prostate cancer. Any day of the week, we do this. It beats some of the treatments. I've done the treatments, and I can tell you, if you diagnose, if you will do the test, go through the testing process, and maybe catch it before, you can avoid some of those uncomfortabilities, if that's a word. But we really want our men to be tested. When you're over the age of 40, men, start checking. If it's prominent in your family, any form of cancer, please go out, and when you hit 40 or your late 30s, start going to be specifically tested for prostate cancer. 5 years before I was diagnosed, I think in 2009, I was diagnosed with an enlarged prostate. I understand today that the King of England was being treated for an enlarged prostate, and during that treatment, they discovered that there's other parts of cancer. I think that story is still developing today, but I'm telling you, early diagnosis is the key. If you catch it early, it's not the death sentence that it used to be. Catch it early, you stand a great chance of overcoming it. There's so many cures out there today for prostate cancer. We're going to do a show on those at some time, but in as much as Joe Madison succumbed to prostate cancer on last Wednesday, I think it would be doing he and everybody who suffers, and every male who could be a victim of prostate cancer, a disservice if we did not take this time to talk about it, in as much as this show is dedicated to the loving memory of the Black Eagle, Mr. Joe Madison. Prostate cancer is something that can be overcome. In the words of Joe Madison, what are you going to do about it? So I don't mind dedicating 10 minutes of the show on behalf of somebody who has blazed the trail the way Joe Madison has, not only as a broadcaster, but also as a civil rights leader. I forgot to mention that Joe Madison used to be on, when Politics Nation first debuted in the 2009, 10, or back there, Reverend Al Sharpton show, when it was a daily show. He was on quite a bit, and I know that was a challenge for Joe because he had to temper his peppered language, but he was seasoned enough to know just how to do that and to move in any crowd that he need to, intelligently yet effectively. And he also had a sense of humor. Tonight we want to talk about the formations of Black history. The rest of the month we're going to talk about. We're going to look at different pieces of Black history. We're going to look at the anthology of Black music. We're going to talk about the tie-in to Black history and democracy, not Democratic Party. Don't misquote me, right-wingers. I said democracy, which this republic used to stand for and used to be about. That's what we're going to talk about. That's what we're going to deal with in the short term during these days. And we're going to also look at entertainers, entertainment. We're going to look at Blacks in politics, Black inventors. we're trying to do something different. We want to kind of bring it up to date and not go back and look at those, even though we would not be here without some of our forefathers, the Benjamin Banneker's and the Frederick Douglasses. We'll also always be appreciative to them. But we want to talk about something that our young people can relate to. We want to talk about some of the things that's here for them today. So tonight is kind of going to be along that line. Tonight, we're just going to talk about the formations of Black history. How did we get here? What is it all about? What's the relevance of it? How did it get started? How did America, of all places, allow for the teaching of Black history? And we all know, we kind of consider Carter G. Woodson as the father of Black history. And Carter G. Woodson and his association of the study of the Negro life and history was part of this great movement that got it started. Black History Month actually started out as Negro History Week in 1926. Negro History Week in 1926. And it was always on the second week of February. And it was on the second week of February for the expressed purpose. And tonight, we're not only going to talk about, we're going to talk about some of the challenges of this celebration or any celebration for our causes, and how we fight to overcome it, how we must overcome it. And one of those nights when we talk about democracy, we're going to have Pastor Rhonda Thomas on. Spent last week with her in Tallahassee, fighting for democracy. And we're going to talk about how we're continuing that fight and the relevance of that fight. Okay. Ironically, Black History Month, Black History Week, as it was, coincided with the birthday of President Abraham Lincoln and Mr. Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass's birthday was on my dad's birthday. We'll be celebrating him. He would have been 100 this year on the 14th of February, Valentine's Day, and he didn't as much do that with us, but I'm told that he didn't have a problem letting everybody know that he was born on Valentine's Day, and I just leave it there. But anyway, Frederick Douglass was born on February the 14th, and Abraham Lincoln was born on February the 12th. Now, I'm going to digress for a minute. I was a product of Duval County Schools prior to integration, and on the other side, during the genesis, the initiation of integration. And prior to integration, your teacher knew you. She knew your brothers. She knew your sisters, if you had them. She knew your parents, both of them. She knew your street, where you lived. That was just the intimate relationship that the classroom had. The principal knew about you and all of that. Well, back during Black History Week, when I grew up, we were taught about Abraham Lincoln and George Washington. Abraham Lincoln was born on February the 12th, and because we were in a segregated system, we were definitely told. They told us about our inventors. They told us about our historians. They told us about our freedom fighters. We knew about Benjamin Banneker. We knew about Frederick Douglass. We knew about the stance that he took. We were actually living contemporarily the works of Malcolm X and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Stokely Carmichael, the Black Panther Party. We were living all of that was happening as I was growing up as a boy. I can remember very vividly my second grade teacher, Mrs. Daisy Burton. Ms. Burton was a friend of my grandmother. And boy, I knew better than to clown in Ms. Burton class, because if you clown in her class, she gets you. Your daddy would get you. If your mama didn't get you, you got at home. Because she knew my grandmother, I was gonna get it from grandmama too. So that was just the kind of relationship we had. But it was Black History Week, and during Black History Week, it was not this spelled out agenda that we now have, because during that season, every day was Black History. It was right in front of us. It was being taught, and our teachers would contemporarily keep us up to snuff with what was actually going on. If Dr. King was marching in Birmingham, or if he was marching in Montgomery, We knew what the march was about. It was about voters' rights. We knew what precipitated. We knew what happened. And we didn't have the news accessibility that we have today. We did not have, there was no CNN. There was no 24-hour news cycle. We had 3 networks, actually, CBS and NBC. ABC, if your antenna was turned right, you could catch it. That station we looked at Batman and the Green Hornet on. But that came later on with ABC and CBS. There was no MSNBC. Lord, thank you. There was no Fox News. There was definitely no social media. What we got, we learned in our classroom from our teachers, and they kept us abreast because they knew during those days it was during Jim Crow laws. There were days that we could not even sit at the counters. We were just beginning, when I was old enough to ride the bus myself, just beginning to sit at the counters because of the group of Jesse Jackson and those at the Greensboro lunch counter protesters at Greensboro, North Carolina. And I'm going to talk about North Carolina in just a second and its pivotal involvement in African American History Month. I keep going back and forth between African American History Month and Black History Month. But it was, of course, then it was Black History Month. But they did these things for us. But our teachers, our schools, there was intentionality that we were made abreast of our history and everything that we dealt with. Okay, so this was 1926, and Dr. Woodson had it was innate in him because in 1915. He was a part of the Lincoln Jubilee, which celebrated 50 years since the emancipation of slavery. Now, we could stop there and go into a conversation about that because you and I have learned in later years that the emancipation of slavery, us being free, was not so much as about just decency for human beings as much as it was a moral issue, as much as it was an economic issue. The South needed slaves for their economic furtherance, but across the country, nationwide, our work in the economy, because our contributions have been known, particularly in northern cities, the red light invented in Washington, D.C. by Black men, and those kinds of things. So we could get into the controversy about Lincoln, but we won't get into that. We'll just say that Dr. Woodson, Carter G. Woodson, had been a part of that summer-long jubilee, that celebration, which was 50 years after the emancipation of slavery, and he bared that in his spirit that we would celebrate African or Black at that moment, Black History Month, Black History Week. Now, let me tell you the importance of the almost shrinking, and we can't let that happen, Black press. We can talk about Black entrepreneurism. We can talk about Black Wall Street. We can talk about, for me in Jacksonville, it was Ashley Street, which was the Black trafficking of economics. And here in Fort Lauderdale, it was Sis Trump. They have a big Sis Trump festival that's coming up at the end of this month. Miami, Overtown. I just was listening to them talk about how I-95 obliterated Overtown in their Black economic district. We could talk about all of that in a simulation. That's definitely a worthwhile conversation that we may have during this month. But all of those things were perpetuated by the Black press. The Black newspaper was always the forefront of getting things out in our community. And as we had limited Black broadcast outlets, there were no Black TV stations, there was no Oprah Winfrey, there was no OWN, there was no BET or none of that. Of course, we know that wasn't Black owned. Now, it's no longer Black owned. Mr. Johnson has sold it. But these platforms did not exist, but we did have the Black press. We had some Black radio stations, but the Black press propagated our story, our culture. That's how we found out about things. How many of you all remember Jet magazine? I wish I had a cover of one to show you right now. How many of you remember Ebony? They were both from published. Essence magazine is still in existence, the Essence Festival, but Jet and Ebony. Jet was the weekly, and I guess everybody, when you talk about Jet magazine, well, I know a lot of the fellas, you go right to the centerfold. I won't talk about that centerfold. I won't talk about having that uh, uh, the centerfolds. And when I left, my brother took my Pam Grier poster and built the centerfolds from the weekly Jet magazine and built them around. I won't talk about that, so I don't want to get in trouble and jeopardize 45 years of marriage. But those were Jet magazine. It had quotes. It kept you up on entertainment. It kept you up on culture. And Ebony was more of a real magazine, meaning it was kind of like it went into more feature articles. Ebony magazine. So the black press, and we'll talk about that later, but the black press, the black newspaper kept us abreast, and it kept and enhanced the furtherance of Black History Week. The black newspapers, the African-American newspapers, the Daytona Beach Times, which Mr. Charles Cherry owned, the Florida Star in Jacksonville, the Broward Times down here in South Florida. These were just some of the ones that we knew about. Well, they helped to propagate African American History Week, the black newspaper. Now, as the black newspaper helped to propagate African American History Week, some of the public schools, because remember, public schools were segregated. Whenever you think about desegregation, think it's like 1971, Mecklenburg County, that's Charlotte, North Carolina, is where the federal courts came in and ordered school busing. We were bused. Some of our schools were closed. A few white schools were closed. A lot of our high schools were diminished to 7th grade centers, maybe a middle school or junior high school, as they call them back then. And we were bused over town. And some of the younger students came over to our side of town. But there was forced busing as a result of the court decision, the desegregated courts in Mecklenburg County. But the school systems, remember, the school system that we operated under one system, but it was segregated. So you had to segregate it. It was the administrators in our schools. These are our unsung heroes. If you're anywhere near my age, you know a Coach Kitchen, or you know a Mr. James, or you know those people, Coach Raspberry. You knew those people, Mr. Boykins. You knew Miss Nesbitt. You know those people in the school system, and you knew the administrators that kept these things in the forefront. And so it was the public schools that helped to propagate Black History Week. The first Negro History Week, as it was called back then, it was not well accepted, met with what they call a lukewarm response, but corporations from departments of education locally, and these are some of the funniest, the states like Delaware. Wow, this one's gonna blow you away. A deep red state now, West Virginia and North Carolina. States like this, in the public school system, they propagated African American History Week. Wow. Well, it wasn't African American History Week. It wasn't Black History Week. It was Negro History Week. And also it was the school administration of local municipalities. And most of these are northern cities. Baltimore, Chocolate City, New York City. They've now had 2 or 3 black mayors. Philadelphia, and Washington, D.C., which we know is a chocolate city, so to speak. So it were these municipalities, along with the aforementioned states, whose school districts focused in and kept Negro History Week in front of us. And we're so glad they did, because now we celebrate, and I want to talk more about where we are and what our challenges are on the other side of the break. And on the other side of the break, I want to begin with a quote from Mr. Woodson. It's going to be, and I want to give a disclaimer when I give that quote, that it was it was Carter G. Woodson, and it was back in the day. It's not But I just want you to hear just how true and relevant that it is even for us today. YouTube, Facebook, we want you to get this program out because a lot of facts are coming out of this. I've done some research and learned stuff. It never fails. The research that I'm doing, I did a lot of research with Dr. King, and I was a King follower. And it was just so many facts came out during my fact finding journeys, and even for tonight's program, which is to set the stage for the balance of the next 3 weeks. Somebody said, "Well, why is African American History Month now in February?" You do the math. Even on a leap year, it's only 29 days. You do the math on that. So we're gonna get ready to go to break, but I want to honor some of the people like Charles Cherry Sr., Charles Cherry Jr., who left us last year. Mr. Eric Simpson in Jacksonville, Mr. Bobby Henry and his family, the Black publishers who have kept our story alive. When we start reading USA Today and we start reading the Sentinels and we start reading the Time Unions and journals and the Heralds and all of that stuff, please never forget the Black press. Please never forget the Black press, because it was so relevant. It was there to give us the story, to keep us up on what was going on. And certainly a giant in his day, and he is someone that we always want to celebrate and remember, Mr. John H. Johnson, who was the owner of Jet and Ebony magazine and other publications that just brought so much joy to us. How many of y'all remember Look magazine? How many of you all remember Life magazine? People magazine is the publishing industry is kind of drawn up with the advent of the internet. Those are long gone, but Ebony and Jet was what we found in our household. You go in any barbershop, any beauty parlor, you saw them on the rack. You go in almost any household, there was some things that you were always going to see. You're going to see a picture. You're going to see the latest Ebony, the latest Jet displayed. You're going to see a picture of Dr. King, and you're going to see a picture of President Kennedy. Those are what you would always see in our households back in the day. Hey, we're going to break, and we'll be right back. Talk more about the formations, the advent of African American history. Roll. GoGigGitWorld.com. You're going to be talking about it historically and contemporarily for a long time because of the great works that they're doing in our community. And as we went virtual, they stepped up to the task and they're doing great things. Just go back, replay the tape, look at some of the people that they have worked with, are working with, and they have some great things on the table. They'll make you look good. They can make this face look good. They can make anybody look good. That's more. GoGigGitWorld.com. Latoya, their group is just top notch. Web building, all of these things. Hit them up on the website, give them a call, and let them hook you up. Can I use that language? Okay. Tonight is we're going to take a little absence from Dang Dog or Are You Serious? And those are popular features, and a lot of people are saying, "Man, please stop! Don't stop doing this." We did a Dang Dog week before last, and we'll be back on those. But I want to do some spotlights in African American history and spotlight some individuals. So before there was Martin Lawrence, before there was Jamie Foxx. Before there were them 10,000 Winan brothers and Winan sisters. Before, oh man, before there was Eddie Murphy. before there was before I'm just trying to think, and I'm looking at all of the names, and I just can't even think of the names. Sometimes I need to write this stuff down. Before there was Arsenio, Monique, before there was any of these people, Cat Williams, before there were any of them, before any of them, there was Richard Franklin Lennox Thomas Pryor, Sr. Tonight we spotlight Richard Pryor, one of the absolute funniest to ever do it, Mr. Richard Pryor. Just, they don't have to see me. Let them look at Rich in all of his fullness. Richard Pryor. Pryor left us at an early age, 65 years old. Some of Richard Pryor's some of his lifestyle kind of contributed possibly to his early demise. But during those 65 years, man, did he accomplish a lot, and did he entertain so many of us. One of the funniest to ever do it, whether it was stand-up comedy, whether it was albums where he earned a Grammy, whether it was movies, whether it was variety shows. He was one of the first black variety shows after Nat King Cole and Sammy Davis Jr., Richard Pryor. Even though it was only one season, the Richard Pryor show was one of the funniest that ever was. In fact, he debuted giving the illusion that he was in the nude. You only saw him from the top of, but of course, you know that wasn't the case. Richard Pryor was absolutely hilarious. Before we got into the comedy of Richard Pryor and a lot of his comedy was informed from his upbringing, his lifestyle. Rich grew up in a brothel that was ran by his grandmother. His daddy was an unseemly character. He was a pimp. He did a lot of unseemly things to raise that family. And Rich grew up and saw all of this craziness, and it informed a lot of the stuff that he was able to fashion and make available for you and I to enjoy as palatable entertainment. Rich went to the Army, and many of us didn't know that he served 2 years in the Army. And most of those 2 years that he spent in the Army was spent in prison. And the important thing about that is that the thing that landed him in prison most of those 2 years was the fact that he and some other black soldiers were watching a movie. Some white soldiers thought it overly funny to make fun of the time when some black people in the movies were beaten like children with whips and so forth on their backs. And Rich and other soldiers jumped on him, and one of the guys they beat within a hair of his life. And so he spent most of his time in the Army, in the armed services, in the U.S. Army, in an Army prison. So we want to give context. We know Richard Pryor was in, and this is, well, I'm not going to touch that. Who he married and how many times he's married and all of that stuff and what color he married, because that's not even a factor. Thank God we look beyond that day today. But a lot of people have to know that Richard Pryor was innately dedicated to his race. He even forsook the N-word, and that was one of his funniest recordings. It was called "That N-Word's Crazy." You know, it's hard for me to. Okay, I'll just leave it at that for this PG audience. He one of his recordings, by the way, he's a Grammy Award winner by his broadcasts, by his albums as they were back then. So Rich has an epiphany when he went over to Africa, and he said he looked around and he said, "Man, this is beautiful. You know, people of one color looking out for each other." And he said, "You know what?" He said, a voice said, "Look, Rich, what do you see?" He said, "There are no N-words here. You see that?" And he came back, and in his absolute next stand-up comedy show, he said he was not going to use that N-word again, and he didn't because of what he saw. So Rich stood up for his race, and man, he was just multi-talented. He was he made Mr. Carson, as Arsenio would call Johnny Carson. He just cracked him up one night. Go back and YouTube Richard Pryor. You'll see some of the funniest things. And while we talk about Richard Pryor, we have to talk about people like Eddie Murphy, who said, without Richard Pryor, there would be none of us. When Rich was diagnosed with MS, and most of us knew that he would not be doing performances anymore or doing movies or things of that nature, uh, Eddie Murphy lined up. First, he had him featured in the movie Harlem Night. He brought Richard Pryor and he brought Red Fox, two of the previous generations, and brought them and made them stars in the movie. And then he had a night out with Richard Pryor at the Beverly Hills Hilton, and he had comedians of all colors and all spectrum lady comedians, which he just brought everybody together and honored Richard Pryor. And sit down and look at that on YouTube. It was hilarious to see all of those comments and see Richard Pryor express appreciation. Mr. Richard Pryor, one of the funniest to ever do it. During this month, we're going to be featuring entertainers and inventors and everything else. But we want to certainly thank God for Richard Pryor, who helped to make a lot of our lives lighter. He was a comedian par excellence. He was a comedic genius. And I think it's just best for you to go back and filter it and get the clean versions, and you'll be thoroughly entertained. Mr. Richard Pryor, tonight you are our salute. We salute you. You are our spotlight in Black History this week, Richard Pryor. Okay, back on Black History Week. Last week I was a part of a boot camp where we trained for forefronting democracy. And like I said, democracy, not Democratic Party, but democracy. Sometimes that lines up together. That's my opinion. And we had to look at all of the things that have been done to stop the propagation of our history and those kinds of things. But one of the things I want to say to you before we continue on is it's incumbent upon you, Father. It's incumbent upon you, Mother. It's incumbent upon you, Pastor. It's incumbent upon you, Black politician. It's incumbent upon you, Black community leader. It's incumbent upon you, Black coach, or you don't have to be Black, but it's incumbent upon all of us to teach our young people our history. We shouldn't have to depend on the schools. Now, Dozell, you mean to tell me that I pay my taxes and I shouldn't expect the schools to teach our history because it is American history? Absolutely right. But while we're fighting this battle to get this corrected and get this turnaround, don't let our children go neglected. Don't let them not get our history because we have not done our parts. Madam Producer, our oldest daughter, Mr. Toya Glenn, told you when we did the Martin Luther King celebration a few weeks ago that the night of the first Martin Luther King celebration, I think it was 1984, I think it was, the first week, the first day of that celebration, and that January month, she and her little sister, they may have been 6 and 5, 5 and 4, something like that. They sat down and they watched all of the news events for a couple of hours that night and saw all of the celebrations across the nation because it was incumbent upon them to see from where we had come. Because you're not going to always get that even in an integrated school system, definitely not to the extreme that we got it and when we were coming up. So I had them to see that. And it's just incumbent upon us to teach this and that our kids will know what's going on. So I want to say it was always resistance to Black History Month, or Black History Week as it was being taught. But before I go there, let me tell you, and I'm doing this as a disclaimer. I'm going to read a paragraph written from what we call who we call the father of Black History Week or Black History Month, Mr. Dr. Carter G. Woodson. And Dr. Woodson said this, and this is important because he's going to say some searing things, and we want you to take it in its context. And remember, its context was its date was in the 1930s. He said this: if race has no history, it has no worthwhile tradition. It becomes a negligible factor in the thought of the world. and it stands in danger of being exterminated. Wow, contemporary. The American Indian left no continuous record. He did not appreciate the value of tradition, and where is he today? The Hebrew keenly appreciated the value of tradition, as is attested by the Bible itself. In spite of worldwide persecution, therefore, he is a great factor in our civilization. So he challenges us with the first statement. He challenges us by saying, and this was a result of a pushback because everybody didn't think that Black history should be taught. There's always that conservative crew. I'm not going to call any names, but even in the theological community, there was a Baptist convention that is present. And when I was in seminary and I heard about this, I was absolutely appalled. Believed in what they call gradualism, that things would come in time. I almost said something bad. Things will come when we push for them to come. They won't just happen. And so Dr. Woodson said, if our race has no history, no worthwhile tradition, then it becomes a non-factor in the thought of the world. And then he points to our indigenous brothers and sisters, and he said that they have where is the value of their tradition today? Because their record was not meticulously documented like we are being advised to do. Like the Black press is where we can't let it fall or falter, because it's a record of us. And then he goes on to say, look at our Jewish brothers and sisters. It says the Hebrew keenly understood the value of tradition, and they kept it pushing. And that was attested by the Bible itself. He said, in spite of the worldwide persecution, and remember, this was in the days of Hitler and all of the stuff that was going on over there, and their intense hatred for Jewish people and the Holocaust. He says, in spite of all of that, the Hebrew is a great factor in our civilization because he meticulously made sure it was documented. You know, there's a statement that says, never again in the Hebrew community. They keep and they teach their children, and that tradition gets out and gets around. And so he says we have to document our history. So in his book, the Journal of Negro History, he noted there were two exceptions that every state had a considerable Negro population and wanted to push this event, but there were two exceptions that didn't do it. They didn't see it as worthwhile. He also pointed out that churches played a significant role. Churches used to be the center of our community. Hey, we're on every corner in every community, and so we have to be relevant. So Negro History Week, when it was encountering all of this, and people say it was a lost cause, and what's the case of it? Here's what Carter G. Woodson wrote. He wrote, when you control a man's thinking, and a man is generic term, when you control a person's thinking, you don't have to worry about his actions. You don't have to tell him not to stand here or go yonder. He'll find the, quote, proper place and he'll stay in it. That's what Dr. Woodson said. So that's why we have to propagate our history. So check this out. From January the 2nd to February the 28th in 1970, Black History Month had its genesis. And you will never believe what college campus it was. No, not University of Alabama. George Wallace wasn't going for that. It was Kent State University. Many of you all know Kent State is the place of the tragedy with the opposition to the war, where it was there were 7 students, I think, that were killed by the National Guard. But Kent State University, this is 1970, so they've kind of always been on the cutting edge of protests. It was right before the tragedy at Kent State. They're the ones who pushed for Black History Month and started celebrating. When look at the time period, it was from January 2nd to February the 28th. That was a long time that was celebrated. So, and I don't know how many of you can remember President Ford when he ran for re-election against Jimmy Carter. He had a black fellow, and nobody looked at him as an Uncle Tom. We just looked at him as a person who was supporting his friend. He played with President Ford at the University of Michigan. And he talked about, I can see that commercial as if yesterday. He talked about a member of an opposite team referring to this brother as the N-word. And on the next play, President Ford powered him down. He forgot to play and went right to this guy and took him to the ground for the words that he had spoken. Well, it was in 1968, during the 1976 rather, during the celebration of the United States bicentennial, that President Ford urged all Americans, these are his words, quote, to seize the opportunity to honor the too often neglected accomplishments of Black Americans in every endeavor throughout our history. So 1976 is basically President Ford solidified what had started at Kent State University in 1970. And then we continued the tradition that was started by Dr. Carter G. Woodson, and we celebrated our history. Now, again, before the break, I said to you, why is it February? You do the math. Well, historically, we see that it was February because it was a birth month. It was a birth week. Remember, it started as a week of Frederick Douglass on February the 14th and of President Lincoln on February the 12th. But you and I know that so it expands. Kent State University was in Ohio, was instrumental in expanding it to the month celebration that President Gerald R. Ford would come on and expand. I want to say this. I was looking at last night. There was a program on TV on MSNBC, and I think it's going to be repeated. You really want to see it, Black Men in America in 2024. And they talked about, they interviewed Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, who's said to be the next Speaker of the House, who is a brother out of New York. They kind of, the brothers that were the commentators, that brothers were kind of pinning him down on a bill that opened some doors and freed up some cash and so forth. And they said, actually, President Trump signed that. He said, yes, he did. He said he did. But it was neutralized by all of the division and the hatred and the malice and everything else that President Trump did, along with what he did, the monies that he freed up for HBCUs, which we have to give our sister Omarosa credit for helping to do a lot of that. He said, yes. He said that did happen under President Trump. He said, but actually, the ball got started under President Reagan. It wasn't Reagan, but it was Democrats who, ruled the Congress, the House back in those days. They got it started, and it just came and was passed because of people like Omarosa, who at that time was in the Trump administration. And you cannot not give that president credit for having actually signed that piece of legislation that freed up money and allowed, propagated more celebrations. So why Black History Month? Put emphasis on our history. Pass it down to the next generations. Our African brothers and sisters were innately concerned that history was passed down. We see our Jewish brothers and sisters are innately concerned that history is passed down, that it's not just enjoyed, it's not just lived, it's not just experienced, it's not just a struggle of the current generation, but that it has to be passed down so that our next generation can appreciate where we've come and can take the ball even further. Reverend Dr. Jeremiah Wright, I heard him say this with my own ears one time, said the African tradition was that everywhere you're present, there are two other generations that are present. It's the previous generation before you, it's the generation after you. They're all present in your loins wherever you are. And that is so true, so honest and so true. Yesterday, my family, our cousins, my maternal cousins, we have a kind of a close bond, text thread and all of that stuff. We've done several virtual reunions. The pandemic brought that by, and we've kind of continued. So yesterday we had a connections where we connected Well, we talked about our grandparents. We talked about our parents. And my mother is still, she's one of those 8 siblings, and she's still alive. She's the remaining of those 8 siblings. And when she signed on, she gave facts about our grandparents, who I remember, but most of my cousins didn't. And she talked about their siblings. Each one of us had to give a funny story, or say something that maybe the other cousins did not know about our parent. And it was so enlightening. It was so it was so, just learning was so rich. And you think you know a person, you learn some more funny stuff. One of our aunts we learned was a connoisseur of Kmart. And it was just so funny the way that was presented. And it was just so, these are trivial things, but there's the highway of us passing down this flow of information. And that's what Dr. Carter G. Woodson's statement, that's what his paragraph was about, that we pass this down. And then after talking about our parents, because we live in different parts of the country, and the learning was so helpful, we then turn to our children. My generation of cousins, we turn to our children, because my cousins in Carolina, my cousins in Georgia, my cousins in California, my cousins in other places, Texas, they may not know my children. They may not even know their names, and I may not know theirs. And so we talked about our children. We told them about our children. One of our cousins had both of our children and grandchildren on. That was so awesome, because it was vital and necessary that we pass the information on. And that's what it is. We've got to pass this information on. Listen, and Pastor Ron is going to be on and talk more about this. If it's left up to people like Governor Despicable, and he has, or as Trump, as the orange Hitler would call him, Governor De Sanctimonious, he has 2 more years. Right when we were getting ready to leave, when we had shut our boot camp down and were traveling back to our various locales, this guy, and this is not a major factor, he took our tax dollars, money that should be going into our communities, and sent them down to the borders here in Florida, and sent the National Guard down and spent our money to do that. And somebody needs to remind this guy that he's no longer running for president. Or is he? So we got to pass that stuff down. We got to let our kids. So we wonder, why do our kids walk around with their pants hanging down off of their tails? Well, we know the whole prison thing about that, because they don't know that they have descended from proud warriors, from kings and queens and pharaohs and leaders of humanity, from those who constructed pyramids, from those who constructed the geometry, the math that we're doing today. That they don't know that we invented things. I was told yesterday that we invented the golf tee. They don't know that, and so that's not in them. In assimilation and integration, they have some of those things are forgotten, and so they don't value the struggle from which we've come. They don't know what it's like for even guys my age, 66 years old, seeing my parent being told to go to take his sons to the back door. Thankfully, my daddy was just not that type of guy. And he said, I'll be that gum, or that burn, I think was his name. He said, my boys will never go to a back door. It's time to find another school. In fact, when integration closed down, the school that was right across the street from where I was living, they closed it down and sent us around the curve on the expressway to another school that was just as old as this school. Maybe it was better kept because they put the money into it, as they did back then. He said, you better find you another school, because that ain't happening, buddy. It was parents like my mother who made sure that we put our heads to the grindstone, that I saw my wife come down with our son and make sure that he put his head to the grindstone, got that work, put that time in. So much so that when we were in the state of Florida, he passed the FCAT in the 10th grade. And so that was not a struggle for him. We have family members, we have friends now that have great GPAs and having to worry about passing tests. We need to know the struggle. We need to know where we came from. We need to know these things. We need to invest. We can't take our hands off. We can't take our foot off the gas, our feet off the gas. We can't get comfortable. We can't let Tallahassee, Montgomery, or no other place determine what goes on in our community. So that's why I salute you, Pastor Rhonda, and I can't wait till you come on and tell about the toolbox that has become, and tell about your conference, and tell about the hundreds of other community organizations and churches and confederations of democracy fighters that have taken on the model that you have set forth here in Florida. Because if it starts in Florida, they're going to try to stop teaching Black history everywhere else. Well, I didn't mean to get that worked up, but it's a cause to get worked up about. We really have to know our history. We can't let anybody rob us. It is a rich history. We are some of the most resilient people in all of the world. You heard us spotlight Richard Pryor. You heard me talk about Joe Madison. It was not easy. Joe Madison is not a whole lot older than I am. Richard Pryor, maybe 20 years older, where he's still here. They had to overcome obstacles. Richard Pryor spent 2 years in jail because he could not take what was being forced on us as people. We had to learn how to navigate around that. I'm gonna settle down when I say this. Today I had the blessed opportunity, and sometimes on Mondays, my good friend Pastor Burrell takes me with some of the dear gentleman that he worshiped with over at the New Mount Olive Baptist Church, and they talked about their military experience. And one man who was a Navy SEAL, he's in his 80s, he was a Navy SEAL, and he talked about how he had to use his intense disdain for the way Black folk were treated by white folk to make him succeed against the odds, to make him fight that battle and show. And one of the gentlemen said, we were always told we had to fight to be better than them. We had to be 2 times better. Now, am I speaking? Am I preaching division? No, I'm just preaching, just speaking truth. That's the way it was. That's the way some of these politicians would like to take us back to. That we sit dormant, that we sit on our history, that we don't teach our history, that we don't love our history, the good, the bad, and the ugly. It's not all pretty. Let's be honest. Let's be truthful with it. That's how we learn from our mistakes. If we don't teach it, if we don't push it, our people will never learn it. Listen, next week's dialogue, we're going to do the anthology of Black music, and we're going to talk about gospel, blues, jazz, all faction of music and musicians. I got 2 great musicians, and I got a young brother that's going to come on and talk about the current music, rap genre, hip hop, and we're going to mix that with some of my old school brothers and sisters that's going to be on. That's next week's dialogue with Dozell. Black history. Look at all social media. Look at Facebook. It will be on X, Twitter. It will be also on YouTube. We're going to be doing some Black history shout outs from the dialogue throughout the week. Check them out, like them, let us know that you're watching. Dialogue with Dozell. We will see you on next Monday night at 8 o'clock. We love you. God bless. We love you, Go Giga Creations. Dialogue with Dozell. Dialogue with Dozell. We're out. We love you, Go Giga Creations. We're out of here. We'll see you next Monday night. Okay, I guess I'm waiting for the music to come on, but until it comes on, we love you. We're so glad that you like us. We're so glad that you check us out, that you have been so faithful to be with us for these years. Listen, look at the dialogue throughout the week. You can continue to look at it. It doesn't end at 9 o'clock on Monday nights. You can pull it up and look and listen to it at any time. And we certainly invite you to and ask that you would. Dialogue with Dozell. We love you. We're out.